September 17, 1944, Private First Class Eddie Kowalsski crouched inside his Sherman tank outside the French village of Arracourt. A Panzer IV had just appeared 400 yards away, its turret turning toward them. But Kowalski's gunner was dead. His commander was wounded, and Kowalski was a loader, not a gunner. He had never fired the 75mm gun in combat, never aimed it, and never even trained on it. But the Panzer fired first. The shell screamed past so close the Sherman rocked sideways, leaving Kowalski tasting copper in his mouth while his ears rang. The turret stank of cordite and blood as his commander, Lieutenant Carson, slumped against the radio, pressing a field dressing to his shoulder. Carson looked at Kowalski and said one word: "Shoot." Kowalski climbed into the gunner's seat with shaking hands. The periscope showed the Panzer reloading, maybe 20 seconds away from firing again. Standard doctrine said to aim for the lower hull to immobilize it, but Kowalski couldn't see the lower hull because trees blocked his view. He could only see the turret, and he had no idea where to aim, because the Sherman's gunsight was calibrated for ranges between 600 and 2,000 yards, while the Panzer was only 400 yards away. It was too close, meaning the sight didn't go that low, forcing Kowalski to guess and aim blind. His foot touched a broken hand mirror on the turret floor, 5 inches across and cracked down the middle. It had belonged to their dead gunner, Corporal Hayes, who used it to check his teeth or shave. Nothing tactical or useful. Kowalski picked it up as the Panzer's gun barrel leveled, giving him maybe 10 seconds before death. His vision narrowed and his breath came fast as he held the mirror above the periscope at an angle and looked down through the gunsight. The mirror reflected the view outside, but much lower than the periscope allowed. He could see the Panzer's hull now, the driver's viewport, and the weak point where the armor was only 50 millimeters thick. He adjusted the mirror, lined up the crosshairs, and just as the Panzer fired, the shell punched through the Sherman's front plate and exited through the engine deck without detonating. Pure luck. 3 inches higher and Kowalski would have died, but the Sherman was still running. Kowalski pressed the firing button, the 75 roared, and the turret filled with smoke as the tank lurched backward. When the smoke cleared, the Panzer sat motionless with black smoke pouring from his driver's hatch. 1 shot, 1 kill. Lieutenant Carson stared at Kowalski with blood soaking his dressing and asked what the hell he had just done. Kowalski didn't answer because 2 more Panzers had just appeared on the ridge line, closer than the first one at 300 yards or less. Both turrets were turning toward the Sherman with guns loaded and ready, while Kowalski still held the mirror in his hand. What happened next wasn't in any training manual, but was born of the desperation of the Battle of Arracourt, which began 3 days earlier. General Patton's Third Army was pushing east toward the German border too fast, stretching supply lines thin. The 5th Panzer Army had assembled over 200 tanks near Arracourt, including Panthers and Tigers, to destroy the American spearhead. The Americans had the M4 Sherman with a 75mm gun, which was reliable for infantry support, but not built for tank-versus-tank combat against Panthers. A Panther weighed 45 tons with frontal armor 80mm thick sloped at 55 degrees, while the Sherman weighed only 33 tons with 51mm of armor. A Panther could kill a Sherman at 2,000 yards, but a Sherman needed to get within 500 yards to even dent a Panther, creating brutal wrath where 5 Shermans were lost for every Panther destroyed. German tackers called the Sherman the Tommy Cooker because they burned so easily, while American crews called them Ronsons because they lit the first time, every time. Eddie Kowalsski knew these statistics, as the 4th Armored had already lost 47 Shermans since crossing the Moselle. His tank had survived 6 engagements, mostly by luck and flanking maneuvers, never head-on at 400 yards. The problem was visibility, because the Sherman's gun sight worked perfectly at normal ranges of 600 to 1,500 yards, but at close range, under 400 yards, the sight couldn't depress low enough to aim at the hull, leaving only the thick turret visible, which was suicide to shoot at. Tankers called this the dead zone, where you were too close to aim properly, but too far to ram. Doctrine said to reverse and get distance, but Kowalski couldn't reverse because 2 Panzers sat 300 yards out. Backing up would expose the thinner side armor, and staying still meant being bracketed and destroyed. Lieutenant Carson ignored the radio, checking for a status report, as he watched Kowalski hold the broken mirror above the gun sight like a magic trick. The lead Panzer fired a ranging shot that hit 20 yards short, meaning the next one would connect in about 8 seconds. Kowalski angled the mirror, saw the Panzer's lower hull and the driver's viewport in the reflection, and fired. The Panzer erupted in fire because the front end peeled open like a crushed can, the flame shooting 30 feet high because he'd hit the ammunition storage. 2 kills in 2 minutes. The third Panzer tried to retreat to get out of the dead zone, but Kowalski tracked it through the mirror, adjusting the angle as it moved. He fired again at 450 yards, catching the Panzer in the engine deck, causing it to shudder and stop as the crew bailed out. 3 Panzers destroyed in 4 minutes with a broken hand mirror. Lieutenant Carson grabbed the radio, his voice shaking, and reported the 3 confirmed kills to a disbelieving battalion headquarters. When asked for his crew status, Carson looked at the mirror in the burning wrecks and said he wouldn't believe him if he told him. Word spread fast, and by afternoon, every tank commander wanted to know how a loader, with no training, knocked out 3 tanks in the dead zone. The dead zone wasn't new, as American tankers had complained since Normandy that under 400 yards, they couldn't see the vulnerable spots like the driver's viewport. The M4's periscope sat high, while the gun barrel sat low, causing the geometry to fail at close range. Tankers were shooting blind and hoping for luck, which resulted in massacres like the one near St. Lo, where 5 Shermans were destroyed in 90 seconds without firing a single shot. The Ordnance Department knew about the problem but offered no immediate solutions, forcing crews to improvise with limited success. Staff Sergeant Mike Diageo had tried a dentist mirror, but it was too small to track moving targets, and he was wounded shortly after. The 4th Armored Division had requested new M4A3 models with better sights, but delivery was months away while the battle was happening now. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Division, told his commanders they had to figure this out or lose half their tanks. 16 hours later, Eddie Kowalsski solved the problem. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams arrived at Kowalski's tank, climbed in and examined the cracked mirror that was absolutely nothing tactical. Kowalski demonstrated how holding the mirror at a 45-degree angle above the periscope reflected the view from 8 inches higher, revealing the lower battlefield and weak points. He explained that he aimed using the crosshairs in the reflection and adjusted the angle by trial and error.
Abrams gathered 12 tank commanders and held up the mirror, telling them this shaving mirror had just solved their dead zone problem. One commander laughed, but Abrams silenced him by pointing out the burning Panzers. Kowalski demonstrated the technique again, showing how to track moving targets through the 30-degree field of view. When a commander asked what happens if the mirror breaks, Abrams cut in and ordered every tank in the battalion to have a mirror by that night, even if they had to steal them from French houses. Within 2 hours, tankers were knocking on doors in Arracourt, offering cigarettes and money for mirrors. By dusk, 47 Shermans had mirrors mounted or taped near their gun sights. Kowalski spent the afternoon training loaders on the grip and coordination required to watch the reflection while operating the gun. It was difficult, like patting your head and rubbing your stomach while under fire, but it worked. At 1800 hours, German artillery opened up, followed by a dozen tanks advancing at 1,200 yards. Abrams ordered his tanks to hold position and let them come. The Germans moved cautiously, expecting long-range fire, but the Americans waited until the range closed to 500 yards. When the Germans realized something was wrong and tried to turn, Abrams ordered fire. 17 Shermans fired simultaneously at the hulls they could now see through the mirrors, destroying 11 Panthers in the first minute without losing a single American tank. However, the mirror technique had a problem nobody anticipated, which almost got Kowalski killed the next morning. At dawn on September 18th, a lone Panzer IV appeared at 300 yards, perfect range for the mirror. Kowalski aimed and fired, but the shell missed by yards. The Panzer returned fire, hitting the Sherman's front plate and slamming Kowalski's head against the gun sight. He fired again and missed to the right, even though the Panzer was stationary. A third shot hit 50 yards short. As the Panzer advanced to 250 yards, close enough to kill them, other Shermans using mirrors opened fire and destroyed it. Kowalski realized the crack in his mirror had widened, creating 2 slightly offset reflections. The crosshairs lined up with one reflection, but the target was actually where the second reflection showed it. He taped the mirror to pull the halves together, which improved accuracy but didn't perfect it. The problem was physics, as a cracked mirror produces multiple reflections that translate to yards of error at combat ranges. Kowalski warned the other tanks, and 3 reported cracks already caused by the stress and vibration of the main gun. Abrams ordered immediate inspections and replacements, but mirrors were fundamentally fragile. Steel mirrors were too dim, and acrylic mirrors scratched too easily, leaving glass as the only viable but fragile option. Division headquarters had no modifications available, telling them to use field expedient solutions. Meanwhile, the Germans were learning and started engaging from ranges over 600 yards, where the mirrors were useless, causing the 4th Armored to lose 8 Shermans on September 19th. Worse, the mirrors were visible to the enemy. German gunners could see the reflected sunlight or the loader's hand and started targeting the periscopes. On September 20th, Private Ray Hollis was killed when a shell hit the periscope where he was holding his mirror. 2 hours later, another loader was targeted. Abrams called a meeting where the mood was grim. They couldn't stop using the mirrors or they would be blind, but holding them up was getting men killed. Painting mirrors black reduced reflection quality, and concealing them until the last second was too risky. Staff Sergeant DiMaggio suggested mounting mirrors permanently inside the turret, but tests showed fixed angles couldn't adapt to changing combat ranges. Handheld mirrors remained the only versatile option, despite the danger. Kowalski told Carson that even if it got him killed, at least he could fight back. Abrams decided to continue using handheld mirrors, but with new protocols to keep them hidden until the last possible second. For 3 more days, they fought using this compromise, destroying 41 German tanks while losing 19 of their own. By September 23rd, the 5th Panzer Army withdrew and the 4th Armored pushed toward the German border. Kowalski survived the war, keeping his cracked, taped mirror, which saved his life 4 more times. The technique never became standard doctrine and was forgotten until a historian found Lieutenant Carson's report 50 years later. The report detailed how 4th Armored destroyed 87 German tanks using mirror-assisted gunnery, with a kill ratio of nearly 3-to-1. Captain Robert Hayes had forwarded the report to the Ordnance Department in 1945, but they dismissed it as impractical since the war was ending. Kowalski brought his mirror home to Pittsburgh and put it in a shoebox, not talking about it because he didn't think anyone would care. In 1973, historian Dr. James Whittemore found the report and interviewed Kowalski, who said the technique wasn't in manuals because it was just a stupid hand mirror used out of desperation. Whittemore published an article, but it remained a footnote in history. Eddie Kowalski died in 1994, and his son threw the mirror away, not knowing that the piece of glass held together with yellowed tape had killed 3 Panzers in 4 minutes. However, the story survived online and went viral in military circles in 2008. Researchers discovered hundreds of other undocumented field innovations, from shaving cream on periscopes to improvised armor. The military studied this phenomenon and realized that bureaucratic approval took too long, leading to modern doctrines that encourage rapid fielding of soldier innovations. A 2013 documentary finally told the full story to 3 million viewers. Kowalski's son donated his father's medals, realizing that the Bronze Star was for the innovative gunnery at Arracourt. Eddie Kowalski never considered himself a hero, insisting the mirror belonged to the dead gunner Hayes. But the Battle of Arracourt remains the single best kill ratio of any American armored engagement in World War II, credited by historians to tactics, but by the men who were there to a 22-year-old loader and a broken mirror. The dead zone still exists in modern tank design, but the lesson remains that innovation often comes from the front lines, where soldiers refuse to accept that a problem is unsolvable. Eddie Kowalski noticed what others ignored, and that cracked mirror saved his crew, his battalion, and maybe his division. 4 minutes, 3 Panzers, 1 mirror. Sometimes that is all it takes. If you found the story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories because each one deserves to be remembered. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.